tonight's reader is Joshua Greber, and he would like to take this time to inform you of something. Thank you. There are only two reasons he is a writer at all. The first is that he failed at medieval-style minstrelling after that restraining order from former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott. This is apparently what happens when you follow a modern head of state around singing his life. Angela Merkel was open to the idea, but her Podnispozelli, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, interfaced with Abbott's security people and no-go. The second is that he has failed miserably at talking and thus must write things down in order to construct anything remotely resembling a coherent thought. Again, public speaking, conversation with his therapist, pillow talk, funny anecdotes at parties, reading stories, he's horrible. So you all ought to be in for one full 8 minutes. Enjoy.
This is definitely not nonfiction, so just be aware of that. You'll understand that caveat in a moment. As yet untitled, I wrote this very recently, so enjoy. She finds him in his socks with his only belt tied one end to the ceiling fan prop and the other clutched around his neck, knees to bed, body slumped forward, head staring down at his now limp cock as if he is trying to will his cold blood back into it. See? No. She glances towards the carpet beneath him, scanning for the ancillary evidence of ejaculation. She finds none. Why had that been her first reaction? She sat in the armchair by his bed, where she'd once puffed 1 or 2 cigarettes. She didn't smoke anymore, except for with sex and wine. That's disgusting, lemon pie, she'd hear her mother say, even now, every time she lit one. She's finding the urge. His nightstand, that's where he always kept them. She finds the pack, Camels, not his usual, and a lighter. The first inhale feels guilty. The exhale settles her. She decides that she'd looked for his ejaculate for the same reason she'd come here today. She'd always wanted him to be happy. What happiness could one wish for the autoerotic hangman but orgasmic ecstasy? Wasn't that the objective? Or had he had something else on his mind? She sacks her memory vault to steal the remembrances of her sex with him. Had he ever asked her to choke him? She'd done it for others, but no, not for Leon. It doesn't bother her to look at him. It bothers her that that doesn't bother her. She wants him to be undead, to reverse this. She would like to interrogate him, glower into his eyes, which had never lied to her. "What is your major malfunction, Leon?" she would say in her best Arlie Ermy. She would generate laughter first, then her own voice, quiet. "What in the fuck?" She sits there, sucking down a cigarette so fast it doesn't have time to ash, because she doesn't know what else to do, in the bedroom of a dead lover while he hangs from the ceiling fan. Had this resulted from his ridiculous love for her? She hadn't exactly been faithful to him, but she hadn't promised to be. He'd begged her to marry him one morning. She'd responded by going AWOL for a little while to give him time to cool off. She'd come here today with brand new lacy black lingerie under her well-cultivated jeans and sweater diffidence, intending to rekindle their love, or fuck buddy-tude, or whatever had gone on between them. His way of asking her if she'd orgasmed was to say, "Did you die?" He'd had an obsession with la petite mort, sex and death, he'd always said. The themes of humanity. You can't get away from it. She begins to think that the bastard hadn't really given freedom a second thought. That was part 1. I don't know if I said that. Part 2. The morning of his overture, she'd woken to the aroma of coffee. "It's not great, but it's hot," he'd said. "Dropped a cube of ice in there so you can drink it right away." From there, he'd tumbled to his knees, the supplicant to her lounging goddess. She'd enjoyed that power, while delivering with unsure voice his speech and a modest ring that didn't comply with her knuckle. "Lululemon, will you marry me?" Her repulsion was visceral, not with him, but the idea. She'd stroked his head from her days. She'd known the answer immediately, but mocked agony over saying, finally, no. Did she care to say why? Did she care to elaborate? She had stood and slowly dressed and fixed her hair into a perfect mess, considering her words carefully. The last thing she'd ever want to do was hurt him. He was standing, watching her, asking her with his eyes to please fucking say something. She stood for the longest time before she said, "It's because you approach love like a deep-sea diver, and I come at it like an astronaut." 3. She had been pleased with that turn of phrase months before, but what she meant by it is only now coalescing in her mind. While she had always considered herself a libertine, with no shortage of men and women willing to think in the same way, Leon had been the first, or at least the most intense, to exhibit the opposite quality. Until meeting him, she'd considered the opposite of the libertine to be the Puritan, but she's realizing that isn't it at all. The opposite of the libertine is the idealizing romantic. He had been one of those. She lights Leon's last cigarette, 5 previous now in the ashtray, because it feels right to do so. He was a romantic, inclined to the mystery of things. He sought the depths, the unexplored territory of the place that he dwelt. She was looking for the skies to new and different worlds. He looked for one quality in all women. He wanted her pleasure, and he knew it when he saw it. She had been aroused with curiosity since she could remember by what was distinctly different about every person. With Leon, there was no putting her finger on it. She found him endlessly interesting for that reason. Now she knows. It had been his fearless acceptance of any risk. There was that position from the Kama Sutra that he thought she might like. They wound up twisted up like a pretzel and dying of laughter together before entering their standby, the more humdrum cowgirl, which had contented them both just fine. There was the proposal. He had to have known how it was going to go. After all, he had known her better than anyone before. The cigarette burns her finger. She licks it, shakes it, and tamps the butt in the filling ashtray. She knows now. Leon wasn't lonely. He hadn't wanted to die. And if her experience told her anything, he sure as hell didn't need it to get himself off. It was the risk of it. The oh my God, I could die of the whole thing. The better, strongest pleasure which shows itself just on the cusp of the bottom out. None of this had been because of her, or even for her, and suddenly she feels disgusted. She is occupying a space that doesn't belong to her. Not anymore. She dumps the ashtray of her lipstick-smudged butts into a plastic bag, leaves the door unlocked the way she'd found it, and calls the police from a gas station payphone down the street before finding her favorite spot, a secluded park bench where she could let herself be alone amongst all of the dissimilar people walking.